The snow was falling over Central Park in thick, silent curtains, the kind of snow that made Manhattan look like a postcard. I stood on the sidewalk outside the Sterling Tower, wearing a dress I had bought for a party I would never attend, holding a suitcase that contained everything I owned after 12 years of marriage. The doorman, who had known me for a decade, would not meet my eyes. The security guards, who had once greeted me by name, stood blocking the entrance like sentinels. My husband had just thrown me out of our home, our penthouse, the one I had designed, the one I had paid for, the one where I had raised his children, hosted his parties, and smiled through his lies. And he had done it on New Year's Eve, in front of 300 guests, with a microphone in his hand and his mistress on his arm. I could still hear the echo of his voice, the speech, the announcement, the moment my life shattered. Julian Ashford had climbed onto the grand piano in the center of our ballroom, champagne glass raised, his smile the particular smile of a man who believed he was untouchable. Beside him, her belly already swelling beneath a red silk dress, stood Bianca Morrow. She was 26 years old. She was his former executive assistant. She was carrying his child. And I, the wife of 12 years, the mother of his 2 daughters, the woman who had funded his company with my inheritance, I had known nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian had announced, I have wonderful news to share on this final night of the year. A new year brings new beginnings, and my beginning starts with Bianca and with our son. He had placed his hand on her belly. A son. After 12 years of disappointment, after accepting that I might never have a male heir, Bianca has given me the gift I never thought I'd receive. So tonight, I'm announcing my divorce from Vivian. Bianca will be moving into the penthouse, and Vivian, he had looked directly at me then, his eyes cold. Vivian will be leaving immediately. 300 guests point 300 of the most powerful people in New York City. Investors, socialites, media moguls. They had all turned to look at me. They had all seen the shock on my face. And not one of them had said a word. Bianca had stepped forward then, her hand on her belly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Vivian, I hope we can be friends, but I know this is hard. But Julian needs a real partner now. Someone who can give him what he deserves. What he deserves that I had given him 12 years of my life. That I had given him my inheritance. I had given him 2 daughters, both of whom were standing in the corner of that ballroom, their faces white with shock, watching their father throw their mother away like garbage. And now I was standing on the sidewalk in the snow, my suitcase in my hand, my children somewhere upstairs being told that this was for the best. The snow continued to fall. The doorman continued to stare at the ground. And I felt something inside me shift, not break. I had broken already in the ballroom when Julian had put his hand on Bianca's belly and called my daughters disappointments. What was happening now was something different, something harder. Something that felt like the first flexing of a muscle I had forgotten I possessed. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone and I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I had never expected to call again. A name my husband had forbidden me to mention. A name that belonged to a woman who had warned me 12 years ago not to sign the prenuptial agreement Julian had placed in front of me 3 days before our wedding. Margaret Vance, M.Y. mother sister, M.Y. aunt. The woman Julian had told me was toxic and manipulative. The woman he had convinced me to cut out of my life entirely. The woman who had said at my engagement party, Julian Ashford is a predator. Vivian, he'll drain you dry and throw you away. And when he does, I will be here. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Vivian. Her voice was exactly the same, calm, measured, utterly unhurried. I saw the live stream point one of Julian's guests was filming. It's already on Twitter. I've been waiting for your call. Aunt Margaret. My voice cracked. You were right about everything. I know, but we don't have time for vindication right now. You're standing outside Sterling Tower in the snow. I can see you on the street cameras. There's a car pulling up beside you in approximately 45 seconds. Get an IT. IT will bring you to me that we have work to do. The line went dead. A black Maybach pulled up to the curb, its rear door opening. I looked at the doorman. He was still staring at the ground. I looked up at the penthouse window, where I could see the silhouette of Julian and Bianca dancing together, celebrating their new beginning on the grave of my old life. I got in the car. The drive took 40 minutes through the snow-quiet streets of Manhattan. We crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, wound through neighborhoods I had never visited, and finally pulled up in front of a building that made Sterling Tower look like a modest apartment complex. It was a black glass spire that rose 60 stories into the night, its crown lost in the clouds, its base illuminated by a single word in silver letters: Vance. The elevator took me to the top floor. The doors opened onto a penthouse that made my former home look like a studio apartment. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. The furniture was a mix of modern and antique, a Bosendorfer piano, a Pollock original, a library that stretched 2 stories. And at the center of it all, seated in a wingback chair with a glass of bourbon in her hand, was my aunt. Margaret Vance was 72 years old. She had silver hair cut into a sharp bob, eyes the color of winter steel, and the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet without her having to ask. She had built Vance Properties from a single brownstone in Brooklyn into the largest privately held real estate company on the eastern seaboard. She had never married. She had never had children. She had once told me, when I was a girl, that the Vance women did not need men to complete them. Men needed Vance women, and usually to their regret. "You look terrible," she said, handing me the bourbon. "Drink, then we'll talk." I drank. The bourbon burned. It felt good. "You told me," I said, "at my engagement party, you said Julian was a predator." "I did. And I didn't listen. That I let him isolate me from you. That I let him convince me you were the enemy. That I signed everything he put in front of me. The prenup, the property transfers, the company shares. He owns everything now, Aunt Margaret. The house, the penthouse, the business that MY inheritance from my parents. He made me transfer it into a joint account, and then he moved it into his own trust. I have nothing. MY daughters have nothing." Margaret leaned forward. "Your daughters are currently in the care of my legal team. As of 40 minutes ago, a judge granted emergency temporary custody to the Vance Family Trust, pending a full investigation into Julian Ashford's financial and personal conduct. Your daughters will be here within the hour." How? "I've been preparing for this moment since the day you married him. Dio, you think I spent 12 years doing nothing? I have a legal team of 47 attorneys. I have private investigators who have been documenting Julian's every move for the past decade. I have forensic accountants who have traced every dollar he stole from you. I know about the hotel receipts, that I know about the offshore accounts, that I know about the bribe he paid to the building inspector to approve Sterling Tower, and I know about the Mistress. He's been seeing Bianca for 4 years, Vivian. Not 6 months, 4 years. She's not just his mistress. She's his accomplice. They've been planning this takeover since she started working for him. For years. My youngest daughter was 3. He planned this, I whispered. He planned to replace me. He planned to drain you. The prenuptial agreement you signed was structured so that if you ever filed for divorce, you would walk away with nothing. But if you filed and he could prove fault, such as infidelity or mental instability, you would also walk away with nothing. The only way for you to keep your assets was if he filed and you could prove fraud. He thought you would never be able to do that. He thought you were isolated, powerless, and alone. He was wrong about the last part. I'm not alone. No, you're not. Margaret stood and walked to the window. The Sterling Tower, the building you just got thrown out of. Who do you think owns the land it's built on? Julian. He bought it 6 years ago for the development. He bought a 99-year lease from the landowner. He never owned the land itself. He couldn't afford to. The land is part of the original Vance estate, Vivian. It has been in our family for 150 years. Your great-great-grandfather purchased it in 1872 when the city was still mostly farmland. The lease Julian signed gives him the right to develop on the land, but the land itself remains in the Vance Trust, and the Vance Trust, she turned to face me, is controlled by me. Or rather, it will be controlled by you, as of tomorrow morning. Me? Why me? Because I'm 72 years old, and I have no children. Because you are my only heir. And because it's time for you to stop being Julian Ashford's victim and start being the woman you were born to be. She walked to her desk and picked up a document. This is the restructured trust agreement. IT names you as chairwoman, effective immediately. It gives you control of all Vance properties, including the land under Sterling Tower. And it gives you the power to do what should have been done 12 years ago. Which is, destroy him, completely, legally, financially, socially. He humiliated you on New Year's Eve in front of 300 people. I'm suggesting you return the favor. I looked at the document, I looked at my aunt, and I thought about Julian's hand on Bianca's belly. I thought about the doorman who wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought about my daughters who had watched their father call them disappointments. "I'm ready," I said. "What's the plan?" The plan, as it turned out, had been in motion for years. Margaret's legal team had been quietly building a case against Julian since before my youngest daughter was born. The forensic accountants had traced every fraudulent transaction. The private investigators had documented every affair, every bribe, every backroom deal. The only thing missing had been me, my cooperation, my testimony, my willingness to finally turn on the man who had spent 12 years erasing me. We worked through the night. At dawn, my daughters arrived, escorted by 2 of Margaret's security team. Lily was 10, dark-haired and serious, her eyes still red from crying. Iris was 3, too young to understand what was happening, clutching a stuffed rabbit and asking for her daddy. I held them both and told them that everything was going to be okay. For the first time in 12 years, I believed it. The New Year's Day charity gala was held at the Sterling Tower Ballroom, the same ballroom where Julian had humiliated me 12 hours earlier. It was the most exclusive event of the year, attended by every major donor, politician, and media figure in the city. Julian had insisted on hosting despite the previous night's events. He had told the press that the gala was a celebration of new beginnings. He didn't know how right he was. I arrived at the Sterling Tower at 7 p.m., but I didn't enter through the lobby. I entered through the private elevator, the one reserved for the building's owner. The one Julian had never been able to use because he didn't own the building. He only leased the penthouse. The land beneath his feet was mine. I wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, custom made by a designer Margaret had flown in from Paris, and my hair was swept up in a chignon. My jewelry was from the Vance family collection, diamonds that had belonged to my great-grandmother, a woman who had built a shipping empire in the 1920s while raising 5 children alone. I looked like a queen. I looked like the woman I had been raised to be before Julian Ashford had convinced me to be small. The ballroom doors opened. 800 guests turned to look. The string quartet faltered. Julian, standing at the center of the room with Bianca on his arm, went very, very still. "Vivian," his voice was sharp. "What are you doing here?" "Security." "Security won't be responding to you tonight, Julian." I walked into the center of the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor. They work for me now, or rather, they work for the Vance Trust. The trust that owns the land this building is built on. The trust one now control. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is my building. My development. Your lease," I said, pulling a document from my clutch. 99 years, contingent on the lessee maintaining good moral character and avoiding any criminal activity. "Do you remember that clause, Julian, the one your lawyers told you was standard boilerplate? It turns out my great-grandfather put it in every lease. He believed that land should only be entrusted to people of integrity, and you have no integrity." I turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I think you deserve to know the truth about the man who has been hosting your charity events and managing your investments. My husband, Julian Ashford, has been systematically defrauding his investors, his business partners, and his own family for the past 12 years. He's been bribing city officials. He has been hiding assets in offshore accounts. He has been embezzling from his own company. And last night, he publicly threw me out of our home in front of 300 witnesses, claiming I was disappointing because I gave him daughters instead of sons." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bianca's face went white. "This is absurd. Julian, do something." Julian grabbed my arm. His grip was too tight, his face too close. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm not finished." I pulled my arm free. "Tonight, the Vance Trust is filing a formal eviction notice against Sterling Development, effective immediately. The lease is terminated. The building reverts to Vance ownership. And Julian Ashford, you have 30 days to vacate the premises, not just the penthouse, the entire building, your company, your offices, your life." The doors opened. A team of federal agents walked in, led by a woman in a dark suit. "Julian Ashford, you are under arrest for fraud, bribery, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Bianca shrieked. Julian lunged, but 2 agents caught him. "Vivian, you can't do this. I'm your husband. 12 years. You were my husband," I said. "Now you're just the man who tried to destroy me and failed. And Bianca, I almost forgot. I turned to her. The penthouse you're moving into? It's part of the building you're being evicted from, and the child you're carrying, Julian has been funneling money into an offshore account in the Caymans. He has about $14 million hidden away that he never told you about. He was planning to leave you too, Bianca, just like he left me. Her face crumpled. 14 million? You didn't tell me about 14 million. It's not true. She's lying. Julian was shouting, struggling against the agents. Bianca, she's trying to turn you against me. I'm not trying to turn her against you. I'm just telling her the truth. The same truth I should have known 12 years ago. I walked toward Bianca, close enough to see the cracks in her composure. He's not going to marry you. He's going to drain you like he drained me. And when he's done, he'll find someone younger, someone more useful. That's what he does. Bianca stared at me. Then she turned to Julian. Is it true? The 14 million. Julian's face was the answer. Bianca stepped back. I'm not part of this. I didn't know about the fraud. I didn't know about any of it. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. You'll tell them nothing. Julian lunged toward her, but the agents held him back. You ungrateful. I gave you everything. The apartment, the jewelry, You gave me nothing. You used me, just like she said. Bianca turned to me. I'm sorry for what I did. I didn't know. He told me you were abusive. He told me the children weren't his. He told me. He told you what he needed to tell you. My voice was cold, just like he told me what he needed to tell me. Now you're going to cooperate with the investigation. And you're going to tell the authorities everything you know about the bribes, the shell companies, and the offshore accounts. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will. I swear. The agents took Julian away. As they dragged him through the ballroom doors, he shouted my name one last time, a desperate, furious cry that echoed through the silent room and faded into nothing. The gala was over, but the party for me had just begun. The trial of Julian Ashford was the largest financial fraud case the city had seen in decades. The evidence Margaret's team had gathered was overwhelming. Bank records, wire transfers, emails. Testimony from 16 different witnesses, including 3 former mistresses and 2 former business partners. Julian was convicted on 42 counts of fraud, bribery, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Bianca testified against him and received immunity for her cooperation. She gave birth to a daughter, not a son, in a public hospital 6 months after the trial. The last I heard, she was living with her parents in New Jersey, working as a receptionist at a dental office. She sent me a letter once, asking for forgiveness. I didn't reply. The Sterling Tower was returned to Vance ownership and renamed Vance Tower. I moved into the penthouse with my daughters, and we spent the first night eating pizza on the floor of the empty ballroom, laughing and crying and trying to remember what it felt like to be a family without fear. My Aunt Margaret retired to her estate in the Hamptons, but she still called me every Sunday with unsolicited advice about the company, my children, and the importance of never letting a man sign a contract you haven't read yourself. I took her advice, all of it. And then there was Adrian Sterling, that he had not been at the gala, that I had never met him before the trial. But 3 months after Julian's conviction, a letter arrived at my office, handwritten on heavy cream paper with a return address in Manhattan. Dear Ms. Vance, it read, Asterisk, I am the CEO of Sterling Global. Our companies have been competitors for 30 years, and my grandfather and your great-grandfather were rivals before us. But I have followed the story of your reclamation with immense admiration. If you are ever interested in a truce, or perhaps a partnership between our families, I would be honored to meet you. No strings and expectations, just respect. Adrian Sterling, asterisk. I called him the next day. We met for lunch at a restaurant in the village, and lunch turned into 4 hours of conversation about business, architecture, family legacies, and the peculiar loneliness of being the last heir to an empire. He was tall, silver-haired, with the quiet intensity of someone who had spent his life building things. He told me about his grandfather's rivalry with my great-grandfather, the legendary feud between the Sterling and Vance families that had shaped the city's real estate market for a century. I told him about Julian, about my aunt, about the years I had spent buried alive in a marriage that had never been real. We were married 2 years later, in a small ceremony at my aunt's estate. The merger between Vance Properties and Sterling Global created the largest real estate conglomerate in North American history. I remained chairwoman. Adrian became CEO. We never merged our personal accounts. We never signed anything without reading it first. We loved each other, but more importantly, we respected each other. And we never, ever asked the other to be small. 10 years after the New Year's Eve gala, I stood on the roof of Vance Tower, looking out at the city, and my daughters were grown. Lily was a lawyer, working at a nonprofit that helped women escape abusive marriages. Iris was in college, studying architecture, determined to design buildings that would last for centuries. My husband was beside me, his arm around my waist. My aunt was 92 and still sharp as a diamond. The company was thriving. The city was different now, more just, more equitable, more aware of the invisible labor that women had been doing for centuries that I had helped make it that way. Somewhere, Julian Ashford was sitting in a prison cell, counting the years. Somewhere, Bianca Moreau was living a life of quiet obscurity, and I was here, alive, free, victorious. Not because I was lucky, not because I was cruel, but because I had finally learned that the woman they called disappointing was the woman worth everything. And I was just getting started.